By the way, my same concern, Harry, about sports is my same concern about real estate. Is I have to think about my mother. And my mother was someone who had 2 jobs. We come from a very modest, economic background. And we cannot forget about my mother. My mother is a figurehead for someone who can't afford her apartment, or someone who can't afford to come watch their favorite sports team. We have to always make sure that we have enough to make sure that we don't eliminate 99% of our fan base, which is someone that has to consider affordability.
Alex, I am so excited for this. I heard so much from Mark Rory, your partner, before the show, so thank you so much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure.
Now, I always like to dive in at the deep end, Alex, and so we look at your incredible history and career, but I always believe we're a function of our history. What are you running from, Alex?
What am I running from?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I never thought about that.
So, I'm running from being the fat kid at school with no friends, and I'm always desperately trying to impress because I think I just want people to like me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it probably where my heart and mind goes to is, Dad leaving at the age of 10 when I was 10, and my mother leaving my mother and my 2 siblings behind. And I was the youngest of 3. And I thought that was a pretty significant part of my life that kind of, for better or worse, had a huge impact in my life.
Can I ask, how did that shape your mindset? Because that is such a significant moment very early.
I didn't really get to unpack it. If you fast forward all the way to 2014, when I got suspended from Major League Baseball, the longest suspension for PED use, it wasn't until then that I had a real opportunity to dive into the deep end of the pool, turn the lens inward, and met a guy, a doctor that really saved my life. His name is Dr. David. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He passed within the last 24 months. But he really changed my life and helped me unpack a lot of the things that happened due to that exit of my father when I was 10. And then more importantly, helped me rewire my brain. And I worked with him for more than 6 years extensively. And yeah, I think that's where my brain goes.
How do you think you changed as a result of that time working with him?
It completely changed. I would say, Harry, that pre and post suspension, I'm a completely different person. And it starts with just appreciation, being grateful. The definition of winning and success is wholly different today than it was before my suspension. Before my suspension, I thought winning and success was exactly what I said. Winning a world championship, winning a big contract, having nice cars or a nice house, dating beautiful women. And what I understood post-suspension, post-Dr. David, was that I was completely out of my mind. None of that is really winning and success. While it sounds nice and it's fun, success today is really built more around gratitude, others around me winning, collaboration, being a present and loving father. Yeah, completely different.
Do you have to practice that? Because I'm with you, it sounds wonderful and gratitude and, appreciation. But when you're kind of in the grind, you're an athlete, Alex. Like, I'm not an athlete. I know I look it, but I'm not. But I'm a grinder. It's not that easy to be like, oh, I really appreciate this and I'm so grateful for this. It's I want to win. But how do you actually bring it back to that today and ensure that you do remember that?
I think it's really about priorities. And it's much easier, I would say, to say this in my 40s versus 20s and 30s, because the thought that I always share with my team is this whole idea that I see a lot of young people make this mistake where they go wide and shallow and they try to be experts at all things. And we always talk about at A-Rod Corp, narrow and deep. And what are the priorities? What are the 2 or 3 things that are most important to me personally, to my family, to my company, right? And you can be great, in my opinion, at 10 things. But if you work really hard at one or two of them, I think you can be great at. So it's priorities and really simplifying and slowing down to speed up.
When you think about kind of where people are really great, those one or two things, I look for spikiness in people when I hire today, which is those one or two things. But I suck at hiring, Alex. Universally crap at it. What advice would you have for me when you think about assembling great teams as a founder, as a CEO, on your lessons on finding people's one or two things and bringing them together?
I've been very fortunate playing professional sports for over 25 years that you end up with this experience where you have pattern recognition. Now, that's not enough, right? You're able to see really talented people who are hungry and gritty. But my partner, Mark Gloria, has taught me a lot about reading resumes. And really, the key is the 10s and the 5s are easy to recognize. The 10s, jump out of the page, and the 5s are people you're probably not going to hire. The challenge is when you have the 6 and the 7s. And if the 6 and the 7s have the gift of gab and are good people, and they can trick you over a series of 2 or 3 interviews. So one thing I would say, hire slow, fire fast. And I would avoid even interviewing as you read through your hundreds or thousands of resumes. I would eliminate hiring 6, 7, and 8s, and I would focus on just the best of the best. That way, at least you're in a pool of people that you want to hire. Then it's just a matter of culture fit for you.
You mentioned Mark there, your partner, one of the most skilled resume readers I think I've ever met. He did mention to me that you're one of the most skilled deal makers that he's ever met, and negotiators. Can I ask, what does great deal making look like and mean to you? You mentioned how your definition of success has changed. What does great deal making mean to you?
Well, I think is empathy and compassion, right? Really connecting with the seller or the buyer and really understanding. I don't think, Harry, you can make a good deal with a bad guy. That's number one. Number two, I do believe in this concept of win-win. If I'm trying to make a deal with you, Harry, and I don't understand that you live in Chelsea and London and you're this great athlete and things are important to you, I need to know what are the things that are important to you and understand what are the 3 most important things with this transaction that mean the most to you. And I'm going to start there, right? But if you have 10 things that are important to you, it's hard to meet all 10, but I can certainly focus on the top 3. And I think working from there and then working backwards is really important. But also being a good listener. I think so many people are busy with, running their mouths. I found that the greatest entrepreneurs and the greatest negotiators are people that are good listeners and then try to work out a structure. Sometimes the price is not negotiable, but sometimes terms are. Sometimes the price is negotiable, but terms aren't. And if you just go full speed ahead and you don't understand the rules of engagement, I think you're not doing yourself, giving yourself the best shot.
I know it varies by situation, but would you say you're a head or a heart person when it comes to decision making?
A what?
A head or a heart. Do you think with your head or your heart when making those deals and decisions?
I think back when if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, definitely heart. I think today, I'm a combination of head, heart, and just some common sense.
What was the best deal that you did, and when you reflect, and what did you learn from doing that?
I think the best deal, or one of the best deals that we've done here at A-Rod Corp is we bought a third of a business called Petros Pace almost 5 years ago. And we bought a third of the company, and it was a lending kind of brokerage business that was ESG and green, and it would lend to real estate owners, and it was a great substitute to mezzanine debt. So in a world where in mezzanine debt you pay mid-teens, you were paying for Petros Pace money about 5 or 6% Of course, this was before the Fed, has raised rates tremendously. And so if you're looking at a loan that is not personally guaranteed, it's half the price of mezz debt, and it's green and makes the world a better place. I really liked it. I love the two founders. We backed them, and then this year we sold it to Apollo for almost 12 times.
Wow. What was the worst deal?
I think the worst deal came around the financial crisis in real estate. It was around 2008. We acquired a beautiful, beautiful portfolio of about 1,000 apartment units. We paid around $60,000 per door. It was right around Yankee George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, where spring training, where they still play spring training. And it was a beautiful portfolio. It was the right assets. It was the wrong timing. What happened was we woke up about 2 weeks later with a crash, and the assets were worth probably $40,000 per door, and we owed $42,000 per door. So we were underwater. That was probably the worst. Thankfully for us, we had enough capital to negotiate with the banks, and we ended up selling that like 5 years later for about $75 a door.
Ooh, that's a worrying moment. In those worrying moments, I find it very reassuring to have bluntly mentors who've been there, done it, seen it. You have some of the most exceptional mentors, Mark was telling me. He told me Magic Johnson, he told me Warren Buffett, John Gray, Barry Sternlicht. I wanted to unpack lessons from them. If we go to Magic Johnson, what's he taught you, and how have you changed having learned from him?
I love Magic Johnson, and he is a very dear friend. He was my hero, and growing up, I loved watching the Lakers against the Celtics, Larry Bird against Magic Johnson. Harry, what Magic did for me is he gave me hope. In my neighborhood, you did not have a lot of role models that wore a suit and tie every day to work, that were a men of color. And then when you go into having a Hall of Fame basketball career and then taking that to a Hall of Fame career in business, the first thing he gave me was hope, because I said to myself, boy, if Magic can do it, why can't I? So that was very important. The second thing he did for me, as we then became very good friends, I had a very important meeting with him that he taught me framework. And he basically gave me his floor plan on how he took Magic Johnson, the Hall of Fame iconic basketball player, to a Hall of Fame iconic businessman. And this was in a course of a 3-hour dinner that we had in L.A., near Rodeo Drive. We went to a steakhouse. We had a back room. Lon Rosen, his longtime partner and agent, set this meeting up. And it was a 30-minute meeting, and it lasted around 3 hours. And years later, I asked Magic, I said, Magic, I am overwhelmed. I was so nervous to ask you, but I have to ask you now, why did you give me 3 hours when it was a 30-minute meeting? And he said, Alex, you're the only athlete that I've sat with that came in with a notebook and had like 9 pages of notes. So I felt I had to cancel my other engagement, and I wanted to really lean in and try to help you, because I thought you were really sincere and present.
Can I ask, what was the secret to his framework? Because it's clearly worked so well for him and for you, but respectfully, it doesn't work for everyone. You are very few people who've succeeded in the way that you have in this business in making that transition. What was his framework, and what has worked from it?
I think there was 3 things. He said, number 1, you have to find the best people in the world to come work with you. End of story. And don't compromise that. They won't expect that from, former athletes like us, right? He said, number 2, lean into your superpowers. Mine is basketball, yours is baseball. So go out and be the best baseball player you can. And when you have an opportunity, continue to do television work when you're done playing, so you can stay connected to the next generation of baseball fans. And thirdly, he said, come out and do these kind of things, Harry, is go out and speak to the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgans, the private equity community, and stay connected and stay informed and continue to stay in front of the smartest minds and continue to practice what you preach. So those three things, I wrote them down in my notes, and I've tried to execute those over the last 25 years.
That must have been such a cool lunch.
It was a dinner. It was a dinner.
I mean, still, that's a fun one. Warren Buffett. I mean, Warren Buffett is you mentioned kind of the private equity community. It's most of our heroes. I grew up on Warren and Charlie's lessons. What have you learned from Warren?
Warren's the absolute greatest, and I've had an opportunity more than a handful of times to sit down with him and spend 5-6 hours in a day where he's literally going over all my books, looking all over the real estate, and just really giving me feedback. And again, it's like having Da Vinci helping you paint or Picasso or something. It was such an incredible experience. I think I learned from Warren a few things. He always talks about sticking to your circle of competence. That's always been really important. And number two, he always talks about, buy the best and forget the rest. The saying that he says is, I'm better off buying a great business for a fair price than a fair business for a great price. And that's been true so far in my career. And then I would say this one I would share with you is, he always talks about, like in sports, separating emotion from investing. And the same is true for sports, baseball, basketball, anything. And what he means by that is, being a great investor, companies, stocks, they don't care about your emotions. He always talks about emotion. Great investors usually have their emotions in check. So those are three things that, among many, that I'm enjoying sharing with you today.
Can I ask you, when I looked at your portfolio, which your team kindly sent over before, the one thing that's staggering is the breadth. I mean, from the real estate to the kind of venture and PE investments to everything in between, there's a lot. How do you think about prioritization and where your spiky self is? Where are you best in business? You said that you're best, obviously, clearly baseball, but now you're a business leader. Where are you best in business?
So I think if you take a step back to when I started my business career about 25 years ago, early on, I wanted to have it like a pyramid where at the very bottom, I would try a bunch of things and put some very small bets, $50,000, $100,000 in a number of companies that I wanted to A, get a good return, but B, get a fair understanding of the business, of the space, of teamwork. And that's what exactly has happened over the last 5 years. We've really kind of worked this triangle where we're only doing things that we're passionate about, that we understand really well, that we have a competitive advantage, and where we can bring real value to the founders. So what that looks like today at York Corp, we do two things. We do sports and we do real estate, right? And sports I've been doing for my entire life pretty much. And real estate, look, I'll tell you, when I was 7 years old or so, I always thought about, real estate because we were lifelong renters. We always rented. My mom had 2 jobs, and I always dreamed about trading places with the landlord. And then sports, I was playing baseball. So if you now cut 40 years later when I'm 47, I'm doing exactly those 2 things, real estate and sports, and are thrilled to be in those spaces.
Well, I mean, you look incredible for 47. Clearly, the facial moisturizer is working. But I do have to ask, you mentioned switching places from the renter to the landlord. Now you're the landlord to, most of America. Looking at the portfolio, how do you think about your relationship to money, Alex? I often had this thinking when I was younger that we watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I don't know if you know this game show. And I was like, when you're a millionaire, life is great. And then I did that, and I was more depressed than ever, which sounds very 1% worried concern. but it didn't make me happy. How do you embrace your relationship to money, Stay, and how do you think about that?
Look, money is obviously a necessity. We always say we got to keep our lights on and all of that. But my relationship with money has changed over the years, because what money allows you to do is to have, more time. And the most important asset we have in our lives is our time, and the ability to spend time with those that you love and respect the most. And for me, those are my family, my daughters, and our team here at ARC. But money doesn't care about me, it doesn't care about you. And so I found that when I really think about process and not results, both in baseball and in business and investing, if I have the best team and we're collaborating together and we have a very sound process and we're laser focused, I will make the bet that in the long run, maybe not in the short run, but in the long run, the success and the capital and the resources will follow.
What's the hardest thing with process, Alex?
I think it's discipline. It could be mundane, it can be boring, it can be... We spend a lot of time here in coaching. We have a lot of young, talented people, and we like to develop our young talent, just like we do in sports. We take a lot of things from the sports world and bring them to our world here at ARC. Coaching, sympathy, compassion, I think all those things are important in leadership. And I think the ROI on that is tenfold. I think if you spend the time on the front end, I think the back end is pretty sweet.
You mentioned that kind of the transferability of skills and mindset from sport to business. I think the one that's really interesting for me is when you're down, when you are losing in either, what is the mind talk that encourages you not drop your head, not lose confidence? When you think back to days in sport and today, what do you tell yourself when you're down and you're losing to get yourself back on even?
I think there's a few things. When they're not going in your favor, some of the things you got to do is just slow things down a little bit. Continue to be grateful and appreciative. And this is hard when things are going bad, right? But you take a step back and say, gosh, I live in this great country. I'm healthy. I have family and friends that love me and respect me. And if you take it all away from me, everything should be just fine, right? So just a little bit of gratitude always helps. And then I would double down into your health and wellness, really making sure that you're having enough sleep, you're drinking enough water, you're well rested, you're getting your exercise in, because the more you invest in yourself, the more you're able to deal with real challenges. And yeah, I think that's kind of been my way.
Alex, do you believe in work-life balance?
Yeah, I do. But I mean, look, sometimes there's times where you have to sprint, right? And sometimes it's more of a marathon. But you have to be able to have the experience, the team around you, the strategy, that when it's go time, and Mark Laurie, my partner, talks about sixth gear, you have to go to sixth gear. But then it's okay to actually enjoy some of your success, to be able to have fun in the culture, we play music here at the office because we want the office to be a place where we celebrate each other, we work hard, we push each other, we keep each other accountable. And like sports, when people mess up, we have an environment here that is safe to mess up because we're not trying to, we got you. What are the lessons? Just like in sports, we lose 2 in a row, we're going to get to practice and we're going to fix this. And we're going to fix it collectively as a team, not to embarrass you, but to help each other out. Because the better that the team is, the better we're going to be as a company.
How do you create an environment of safety where you do have that, but also not an acceptance of continuous losing? You know, if a coach loses 10 games in a row, we might need to cut him. But you want him to try. How do you create that balance?
Yeah, I think it starts at the top, right? We talked about higher and slow, and then it's cultivating that talent. But how do you create an environment? I think it starts with a leader. And the leader has to be able to stand up and say, hey, I take full accountability. This is on me. And the more vulnerable you are with your team, hopefully it creates an environment where they feel safe doing that. That doesn't mean you have to like spill your guts in front of everybody, but it means that, at times there's challenges, and to be able to come to your senior report person or to someone like myself, you want to have that culture, you want to have that trust. And just like I can tell you, I've had coaches, hitting coaches, managers in baseball that I knew they had my best interest at heart. And because of that, if they said jump, I would say how high, and I would do it without thought. The opposite, Harry, is also true. I've had coaches that I felt they had my worst interest at heart. So anything they told me, I questioned. So when I take that thought process to the business world, is exactly the same thing. The first thing that you have to think about is, Harry, if you and I work together, do you really think that I have your best interest at heart? If the answer is no, we're done, right? So building that trust early, building that bridge, I think is vital.
You mentioned that kind of best interests at heart. I'm a little bit concerned about the future of the sports industry because we see this flood of PE capital coming in, respectfully, largely from our dear friends across the pond in your wonderful nation, into English football, but buying English football clubs and just buying sports franchises. And it's kind of, sport is becoming such a business today, unlike ever before, which has its pros and cons. How do you foresee the next few years in terms of the business of sports franchises and where the opportunities are in your mind?
I think you have to thread the needle, Harry. I think what's beautiful about sports, it's the great passion, these progressive owners over the years. I can just tell you here about America, but when you think about, Dr. Buss with the Lakers, when you think about George Steinbrenner with the New York Yankees, Al Davis with the Raiders, Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, Jerry Reinsdorf, so many great ones. You have this heart and passion connected to the franchise, which connects with the fan base. You think about what Jerry Reinsdorf has done with the 6 championships with Michael Jordan. Jerry and Michael were very much tied at the hip. It would be different if it was Michael Jordan tied into Blackstone. It just doesn't have the same feel, and I think Blackstone's the greatest of the great. But if there's a combination, Harry, where you can still remain and keep the Robert Krafts, the Jerry Joneses, the Buss family still involved in the forefront, and because these franchises have exploded in enterprise value, then I think is a good mix, because you get the capital from the institutions, but you still get the passion and the follow-through from the Robert Krafts of the world.
What do you think that looks like in 5 years' time? How do we see sports franchises evolve? And what does that landscape look like?
I'm not sure, because if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have been completely wrong of where we are today. The truth is, in the middle of COVID and this, direct-to-consumer and what's happening to the regional sports network deal, 5 years ago, while some people saw some of it, I think someone would be lying if they said I forecasted everything. I think we've seen more changes in the last 5 years than we've probably seen in the prior 30 years.
Right.
I think the same is going to be true here in the next 5 years. A lot of this enterprise value is driven by television, by the national television deals. So it'll be interesting what that landscape looks like in the next 5, 7, 10 years. But I do think that there's going to be a world where it's going to be a lot more franchise, direct-to-consumer. And that means with the way you watch the sport, how you interact with players, how you interact with buying merchandise, and everything in between.
Is there anything you're worried about when you look at the sports franchise landscape and how it could evolve?
I just think, I always think about the fan base, and we can never... By the way, my same concern, Harry, about sports is my same concern about real estate. Is I have to think about my mother. And my mother was someone who had 2 jobs, and we come from a very modest, economic background. And we cannot forget about my mother. My mother is a figurehead for someone who can't afford her apartment, or someone who can't afford to come watch their favorite sports team. We have to always make sure that we have enough to make sure that we don't eliminate 99% of our fan base, which is someone that has to consider affordability.
Cass, do you see the unfairness of life now? I was having a chat to a friend of mine who's a billionaire hedge fund manager last night, but I was like, interest rates rise, everyone poor, their mortgages go up, and we sit here with a ton of cash going, this is great, we're getting 5% now. Like, this is awesome. Just the rich just get richer, and we're in a super fortunate position, but I came from nothing too, and I'm like, God, it is unfair.
Yeah, it is tough, and you have to think about, the local couple that, maybe both of them are professors or teachers at the local high school or junior high, and the local nurse. And if you have a mortgage and you're a homeowner and you have a 5-year fix and you have a balloon payment in 5 years, and all of a sudden you go from 2% to 8%, you can no longer afford that house.
Yeah.
And if those are things we have to consider as leaders, as government. You have to think about the people that cannot afford these type of movements, because they've gone through all their expenses. They've gone through all their liquidity. Most people have $4,000 or $5,000 in their bank account. So how do we create a world that helps that person?
Final question before we do a quick fire round. You've mentioned your girls several times. I've heard you talk about them before. How did becoming a father impact your mindset towards performance, business, and how you operate?
Well, I think with my background and dad leaving when I was 10, ever since I was 11, 12 years old, I remember thinking to myself and making a promise that if I ever had the privilege to become a father, that would be my number one responsibility, and to be a present father and raise, a son or girls. I happen to have 2 daughters, 18 and 14. That's my number one priority in life. And I do believe in today's day and age, probably in every day and age, the most important responsibility we have in this world is to raise our children. And everyone talks about fixing the world, but I think it starts at home. It starts at the dinner table. It starts with putting the phone away. It's having a conversation. And this thing is really important because I see where 95% of kids quit their sport on the ride home with their parents. And if there's parents out there, one of the reasons why I think I made it to the major leagues, the gift and the curse of not having father and having my mother working 2 jobs, is I never had this, win at all cost when you're, a 10, 11-year-old boy. So for the parents out there, I would say be really thoughtful on how those conversations go after practice or after dance. It shouldn't be like, did you win? Did you get an A? Did you do this? It should be like, what was the most enjoyable part of your day? Did you work hard? Did you prepare? Did you enjoy? It shouldn't be about results, because that creates a lot of anxiety for young people. And I think the gift and the curse of not having dad around, I think that was one of the main parts where I think I did have a long, fruitful career in baseball.
How do you engender the same ambition and hustle in your girls when, respectfully, they're brought up in different financial environments to how you were brought up in?
I think it's less about what you say and more about what you do. Rachel, who's sitting here next to me, has been working with us for years, and I love her for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons I love her is she's really fair and tough with my youngest daughter, Ella. And Ella comes home and complains like, oh, Rachel's being this and this, and she's not being fair. And I go back to Rachel. I said, Rachel, congrats, you just got a bigger bonus. Because that's exactly what my daughters need. They need people that are straight, that are real. Because, fortunately, and unfortunately, they didn't grow up how we grew up. So the more, in a weird way, the more they lose and the more they can learn from those lessons early on, the more people can be straight with them and not BS them, the better they're going to be. So Rachel's helping me, and Cynthia become even better parents.
I love that. Listen, we're going to do a quick fire round. So I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. So, dead or alive, you can have dinner with any person. Who's that person and why?
I would say Jackie Robinson, because Jackie was a 4-sport athlete out of UCLA, and he was actually the first African-American. So in many ways, he broke the barrier for all of us. And I would be curious, what courage it took for him to play baseball at such a high level, be a champion, and deal with so much hate.
What have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I think our strategy on continuing to buy real estate assets, I've basically put a pause on everything, and we're sitting back and just watching and seeing where the Fed goes with interest rates.
Purely because of the interest rate environment, or?
I think there's still a disconnect between buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
Sellers still think their asset is worth $10, and we think is worth $3. And when that closes, eventually they'll call you and say, I'm ready to sell now for $8. And then we'll say, okay, we're not ready yet. And then they'll call back and say, okay, we're ready. We'll sell it to you for $5. And we'll say, we're not quite ready yet. And eventually they'll call and just say, okay, we'll take the $3. And then we'll say, okay, we'll wire the money. We know the asset and we're ready to go.
Yeah. Go slow to go fast. Well, most painful lesson that you've learned that you're also pleased to have gone through?
I think the suspension, my suspension for PED use. Rob Manfred suspended me, the commissioner, for an entire season. But that season allowed me to, I really think, lessons learned, taking full accountability. My therapy with Dr. David really set me up nice.
That's a really rude question. You were so good. Why do it?
I think that's something that it was a really silly, dumb decision. And that's kind of part of the therapy, right? That I kind of, today I'm a changed person. I would never do that. And what was most rewarding for me, Harry, and I've come to the place where I've forgiven myself. The most important thing as I think about my baseball career is what happened at the very start when I was 19, and what happened at the very end in my last season. At 19, I came second in the MVP to Juan Gonzalez, and I was just a skinny lad, hit 358 and won a batting title. And then as a broken down, guy at 41, playing for the Yankees after 2 hip surgeries and 2 knee surgeries, I won the MVP for the team, hit 33 home runs, and brought them back to the postseason. So, Harry, to your point, is when I think about, I don't need any of that stuff, because at 19 and 41, I had 2 of my best seasons, completely clean and in a great frame of mind. Makes you go back and go, boy, what a knucklehead. But you know what? That mistake now sets me up for the back 9 of my life, and I've never been in a better place, happier, more grateful. And if it cost me the Hall of Fame, I have no one to blame but myself. But if it can help the next generation avoid some of the mistakes that I've made, then ultimately there's a lot to play for.
What one word would be on your tombstone, Alex?
I can't say team player because that's 2. Maybe collaborator.
Yeah.
I think that at least in my life, anything that I've done that's been horrific has been by myself. Anything that I've done that's been great has very little to do with me and really around the people that we've collected around the room to work as a team together.
What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered for, Alex?
I think someone who is loving, fair, and a very good father.
And then final one for you. If we do this in 2028, 5 years' time, where are you and where's ARC in an ideal world? Obviously, difficult to predict.
I'm probably right here at my office with the great team and hopefully with a world championship for the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Alex, listen, thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate it, and you've been fantastic to have on.
Thank you, Harry.